Consumers want to know the facts about the products they buy, but America's agricultural landscape is not easy to navigate. Between different companies, scientific advancement, government regulations, advertisement campaigns, and an unhealthy amount of myth and misconception, anyone would be hard-pressed to make sense of it. That's where Real Ag comes in, from the producers who make your food, to the store where you buy the final product, and everything in between. This is Real Ag. Now, here's your host, Kyle Bauer.
Kansas wheat farmers work hard each year to grow the nation's largest supply of high-quality, hard red winter wheat. Kansas wheat farmers produce more than 322 million bushels of wheat, enough to produce 23.5 billion loaves of bread. Wheat is our topic today on Real Ag.
Production of Real Ag is made possible by
the Kansas Soybean Commission, the Soybean Checkoff, progress powered by farmers.
Wheat is a cereal grain, so it's a grass plant is the type of plant it is. It's similar to some of the wild grasses you see growing in Kansas in the ditches and highway medians. Wheat originated in the Middle Eastern part of the world about 10,000 years ago. A bunch of wild grasses crossed over time and gave us our modern day bread wheat. So that's the origination point of the plant. Wheat has been grown here in Kansas for well over 100 years, back to the mid-1800s. Wheat, amazingly, is a very similar plant to what it was 10,000 years ago. What we've done in modern wheat breeding the last few decades is increase yield of that wheat plant. So when a farmer harvests the plant, we want more bushels, more grain per acre harvested. And we've also bred it for higher quality for bread baking. So when we mill that wheat kernel into wheat flour, we want it to make a good loaf of bread. And so those are the two factors that have really changed about modern day wheat.
It'll grow in different environments, but it's a plant that's grown specifically for its to harvest the berry or the wheat kernel that we use for milling and turn into flour. And wheat is incorporated in almost every baked good that you buy in the grocery store today.
Is wheat nutritious?
Across the world, if you look at total calories or the different foods that provide nourishment for mankind, wheat is one of the top sources of nutrition worldwide. So it has a huge impact on human health and nutrition and feeding people all over the globe.
Wheat is really a very healthy product. So there's really three parts to the wheat kernel. The outside, which is the bran, which is where the fiber comes from. The inside white chalky part, which is the endosperm, and that's what wheat flour is made of. And the germ of the plant, many people are familiar with wheat germ, which is very healthy. In fact, it's one of the healthiest foods in the world. It's full of good vitamins and minerals and healthy oils. When you eat a wheat food, especially whole wheat foods, it's a very nutritious product. And even the wheat breads that are just regular white breads, by law here in the United States, they're fortified with extra vitamins and minerals. So on the nutrition chart, wheat is a very healthy food. We use every part of the wheat kernel when we're making whole wheat bread. When we're making just white wheat bread, which just uses all-purpose flour you would buy in the grocery store, that's just the endosperm, the middle part of that wheat kernel. And then we separate the bran and the germ of that kernel, and those are used for other purposes.
How is wheat exported?
Well, the United States has been growing wheat, obviously, almost since the beginning of the country. Right now, the United States is one of the world's largest wheat-producing countries. In fact, we grow so much wheat here in Kansas that we export roughly 50% of the wheat in the state every year overseas to other countries. So farmers grow enough wheat here in the United States and in Kansas to feed not only the people here in the United States, but many other people around the world. Here in the central Great Plains of the United States, just turned out to be a perfect environment for growing winter wheat in the high plains. Most of the wheat grown here in Kansas that goes for export would be going to Nigeria. Mexico is also a big customer just because they're our friends right across the border. and a lot of our wheat also goes into a lot of other South American countries. The wheat is exported through a couple of means. Most of it is by ship. It goes either from the Gulf of Mexico in Texas or from the Louisiana Gulf of Mexico ports down to South America. But some of it does go by rail, just from the United States down into Mexico. And obviously anything we ship over to Africa or the Middle East or any other country goes by big cargo vessels. The wheat is inspected at certain points, so anytime a train is loaded at an elevator, each of those cars is usually inspected by the Kansas Grain Inspection Service to monitor that for the specific quality that the customer is looking for. And then especially before any wheat is exported overseas or across the border from the United States, it's inspected by the Federal Grain Inspection Service. That's mandated, and that's a non-biased service that inspects each cargo of wheat to make sure it meets the demands of what the customer is asking for. I think people are surprised on how many products wheat does exist in. Obviously bread that you buy in the store, any baked goods typically contain wheat in them. But there are things that people might not suspect. Twizzlers, licorice sticks, candies are made with wheat flour, have that in as a main ingredient. But wheat is also used a lot of times as a thickening agent. So if you buy a can of soup, you might find that there's wheat in that product also. If you went through a grocery store and we looked at all the aisles and checked off the products that have wheat, I think people would be surprised.
Anything that would have some volume to it. So if you think about a loaf of bread that has to rise and have volume, those are the types of products that you'd see wheat. So definitely breads, biscuits, cookies, all of the kind of baked goods are most likely going to have some fraction of wheat flour in their mix. But you also see flour in gravy mixes or bagged pre-mixed cake, Betty Crocker cake mix and these types of products as well. So wheat flour kind of finds its way onto the ingredient list of a lot of our food that we consume.
Other than food uses, since wheat is a starch, you can make plastics out of starch, as an alternative to petroleum. So you can make things like plastic silverware or golf tees out of wheat starch. And there are a few companies that do that here in Kansas and the United States. But what's fascinating about that is if you had a plastic fork made from wheat starch, it's biodegradable. So it does break down in the soil or in the garbage, unlike a petroleum-based plastic, which would not break down. Wheat farmers have to interact with a lot of government agencies, most importantly, as you might imagine, the United States Department of Agriculture, USDA. USDA is the entity that administers all the farm programs, crop insurance that is vital to farmers so they can withstand bad weather events that might destroy their crop. Environment, farmers are great environmentalists. They're trying to preserve the soil for their future generations, so conservation services under the U.S. Department of Agriculture. The Environmental Protection Agency monitors and regulates how chemicals used in the farming practices. So there's a lot of oversight from the government. Of course, the Food and Drug Administration is involved with approval of products when they get to the grocery store, so the farmers don't have to deal with them on a regular basis. The harvest in Kansas is a big event. Wheat harvest in Kansas starts in early June and lasts through the first part of July. So we have approximately 9.4 million acres of wheat grown in Kansas every year. And an acre, if you imagine a football field, is about the size of an acre. So imagine 9.4 million football fields of wheat grown in the state. What we try to get is 40 bushels of wheat per acre on average. That's the goal that we shoot for. And a bushel is approximately 60 pounds of wheat. Many folks may have seen a bushel basket, but if you haven't, it's about 60 pounds of wheat per bushel. So if you think about it, we can grow 40 bushels of wheat per acre on 9.4 million acres. We can grow anywhere from 350 million bushels to well over 400 million bushels of wheat every year in the state of Kansas, depending on weather conditions and how things work out for the crop. So it makes a lot of bread. You figure about 1.5 pounds of wheat flour per loaf of bread. So you can make 40 minimum loaves of bread from a bushel of wheat. So Kansas makes a lot of wheat, and we can feed a lot of people with that wheat. So when farmers harvest wheat, the wheat has to be ripe. And the biggest indicator that the wheat is ripe is the moisture content. How dry is that kernel of wheat within the wheat plant? And there's machines that measure it. The combine can measure that. But at the local elevator, they have a machine that tests the moisture. They'll take a sample of that wheat off of the back of the truck that it's being delivered, take it into the elevator, put it through the machine, and really you're looking for a moisture percentage of 13% or less. And if it's hot in July, in June and July in Kansas when wheat farmers are harvesting, that moisture usually is around 9, 10, 11%, which means that wheat is ripe and ready. And the old-fashioned way to do it is take the kernels out of the wheat head and put them in your mouth and bite on them. And if they crunch, the farmer knows that wheat is plenty dry and ready to harvest. Well, other things that the elevator will look at when a farmer brings in a truck is they'll sample that wheat from the back of the truck. They'll test it for moisture, but they're also going to look at test weight, which is how much that wheat weighs. We talked about 60 pounds per bushel. That's the goal, but it doesn't always weigh 60 pounds per bushel. Sometimes it's in the mid-50s or even lower than that. That's a quality factor that they look at.
When it comes to milling, what are the steps?
The farmer will deliver wheat from the field or from the farm into the flour mill or maybe to a local elevator. And the wheat at that point is still, it comes right out of the field, and so there may be some dust or some chaff or some wheat stems or something with the wheat, and so it has to go through a cleaning process to completely clean the surface of the wheat berry and remove any kind of foreign material. So after the wheat's cleaned, it's really a food grade product, and then it goes through a series of grinding steps. We use a roller mill to break the kernel open, and then we use a sifter that will take out the small flour particles. And so each time you grind a little bit more of the flour out of the inside of the wheat berry, and after you grind each time you sift and remove a little bit of flour. And so it goes through multiple rounds of grinding and sifting and grinding and sifting. It's called a gradual reduction process, where you're slowly grinding away at the inner part of the wheat berry to remove the flour. At the end, you're left with the wheat flour, and then the byproducts would be wheat bran or wheat germ. And a whole wheat flour or wheat flour that you might see in the grocery store, it's a lot simpler process where you still go through the cleaning steps, but then the wheat is ground entirely, the entire wheat berry is ground into flour in really a couple steps, and then sifting out large particles and regrind those until everything is a flour-sized particle to make a whole wheat flour. So a couple different processes, but in general, it both involve grinding the berry into a small particle and then sifting out the flour. Every flour mill is a FDA-approved or certified food processing facility, so it would be under inspection by the FDA, and each flour mill would have to be certified to produce a food product by the FDA. We also interact with the USDA specifically on the grain grading and measuring kind of the quality of wheat before it goes through export outside of the U.S. So those would be a couple of the key government agencies, USDA and FDA. When the wheat comes into the first grinding step, we call first break, within really 5 minutes you would start to see some flour produced. Within about 40 minutes you'd see the entire flour mill filled with the different products at different stages of processing. And after that, it would be a continuous process, and it runs 24 hours a day, many times 7 days a week, where you constantly have a flow of wheat coming in and constantly a flow of flour coming out. So it's a kind of a balanced process, but to get the whole thing completely filled and balanced, about 40 minutes.
Are there additives used in flour?
The refined flour, the white flour that we produce is mandated to be enriched with vitamin fortification. So it would be thiamine, niacin, riboflavin, folic acid, and iron. Those are kind of the required enrichments. The whole wheat flour is not an enriched product. There may be some other things, other ingredients that are added to the flour in the flour mill, bleaching agents that may improve the color of the flour. Some cake flours may have chlorination to change the properties of the flour. So depending on the customer's specifications, some minor ingredients could be added to the flour at the end of the process. So before the flour would be packaged into a bag, it may have some small ingredients added, but all white flour would have vitamin premix by law. Depending on the customer, if you have a large bakery customer, a Sara Lee or some industrial baking process, they may receive their flour in a semi-load, like a bulk truck. So we would actually just blow, using a pneumatic blow line, we would fill the truck with flour, no bag. It just is completely truck full of flour, and then we drive the truck to the bakery, and they have a vacuum system, and they vacuum the flour out of the truck into their bins. So there's no other handling, but most flour mills would have like maybe a 50-pound bagging station where they would do bagged flour for a small bakery that may be using 50 pounds a day or something. And then also we have our retail bagging, which would be our 5-pound or our 10-pound bags that you'd see in the grocery store. So depending on the customer, really kind of would dictate what kind of packaging or bagging capability the flour mill would have.
The economic impact of wheat on the country is huge. Specifically in Kansas, it's a $3 billion industry every year. Local farmers are prospering and having a good wheat crop. That means that the local farm equipment dealer is having a good year. That means the local elevator is having a good year, and that helps the small communities thrive. So it's in the best interest of all those communities for farmers to be productive and have a profitable year. The economic impact in the United States, again, when you think that 50% of the wheat we grow every year is exported, it's one of the largest export values from the United States.
What is gluten?
Gluten is the main protein in wheat. So if you look at the wheat kernel, what it's really designed to do in nature, the inside of the berry is a nutrient reserve for the plant. When you plant the seed, before the first leaf comes out and can start receiving energy from the sun, it has to use the energy from the inside of the berry, and the gluten proteins are storage proteins that would be used as a nitrogen source for the plant. For our purposes, it's unique, but when you add water to a flour, these proteins, these storage proteins in wheat, they become intertangled and kind of entwined, and they form a kind of a stretchy, rubbery kind of a dough. And so it's not a single protein, gluten, but really probably a couple hundred storage proteins that come together in a mass to form what we call gluten.
So gluten is not just important for making bread. Gluten is a thickening agent. So when we talked about wheat being in like soups, gluten serves as a thickening agent in that. But it's really the magic part of wheat that allows us to enjoy those loaves of bread, those cinnamon rolls, anything that is a yeast-raised bread product. You have to have that gluten structure to make that work. Wheat is a very healthy product, and it's been around for thousands of years, and it's consumed all across the planet. And right now in the United States, there's this trend from eliminating wheat from your diet or gluten-free diets. And we encourage people to review all the facts before they eliminate wheat from their diet. Just keep in mind that people have been consuming the product for over 10,000 years on the planet, and it's a healthy product. It's not good to eliminate from your diet if you don't have to.
We hear a lot about celiac disease. What is it?
Celiac disease is a disease that actually affects a small percentage of the population, maybe 1.5% of our population. And it's an autoimmune disorder that when a person eats wheat, there are small fragments of the gluten proteins that the body recognizes as a foreign substance, and it triggers a response in the stomach that forces the immune system to attack the inner lining of the intestine, and so it causes intestinal pain, and it can have different kinds of symptoms, but it's all triggered by this small fragment of the gluten proteins that the body recognizes as some foreign substance. So it's not fully understood what really is the root cause of celiac disease. Why is it getting so much press, and why is it so in the focus of the media today? I think part of it is that we have better ways to diagnose celiac disease than we had in the past, and so in the past they may have called it irritable bowel syndrome or some other, by some other name, but which maybe was actually a gluten sensitivity or celiac disease. But I can't say for sure why the focus of celiac disease has risen so much. One thing I will say, when you look at food allergies, in general, they are most of the time protein-based. So if you look at soy allergen, it's a reaction to a soy protein. Milk allergies, again, is a reaction to a milk protein. And so almost, not all, but most of, or many of the food allergies are protein-based, which is no different than celiac disease, which is a food allergy that is protein-based. And so it's not clear why the body recognizes some proteins as a foreign substance, but that's just the way it is. The other thing I'll say about celiac disease, which is different from other food allergies, is that it's harder to avoid wheat than it is to avoid milk. So you don't necessarily need milk to make a loaf of bread, and so if you have a milk allergy, avoiding milk isn't as difficult as it is to avoid wheat flour, because it's so prevalent in the foods that we eat. And so avoiding wheat flour means that you avoid most of the foods that we would normally eat. And so that, I think, is the challenging part of celiac disease that maybe brings it into a more of a focus in the media.
But we are doing some research to try to solve that celiac disease problem, and hopefully one day allow people with celiac disease to eat wheat again. Unfortunately, the only way to truly diagnose celiac disease is through some pretty serious blood testing and sometimes some biopsies. So normally what a doctor would do to try to help you identify if you have celiac disease is process of elimination of wheat from your diet. But even that doesn't do a good job of identifying what the problem is. A lot of people eliminate wheat from their diet and say, hey, I'm losing weight. Well, you have to think about all the other things you're eliminating when you eliminate wheat from your diet. So it really does come down to calorie counts.
So there's research groups really all over the world that are looking at celiac disease. A lot of the work is being done in the medical field on diagnosis and also on remedies for celiac disease. Our group here at the Kansas Wheat Innovation Center have been working on a project for a year now to look at the celiac disease reactivity of wheat with the hopes of identifying exactly what proteins in wheat are causing this reactivity. So this is a project funded by the Kansas wheat farmers through the Kansas Wheat Commission. And really the aim of the project right now is to identify a test we can use to measure the level of reactivity. Getting to a point of zero is it's a very difficult task. There's maybe many hundreds of different small fragments that cause this reaction, and so our initial goal would be to lower reactivity, and then long term, once we learn more about what it is that's causing this reaction, we would hope to eliminate reactivity in wheat. It's an ongoing process. So in the beginning, we'll look at all sorts of varieties of wheat coming out of Kansas and other states, and so we'll look at commercial varieties. We will look at historic varieties. We have seed from the Kansas breeding program all the way back from the early 1900s. So we have genetics all across the breeding program. We also have material from the Wheat Genome Resource Center, or Wheat Genetics Resource Center here at the Innovation Center, which would be the wild relatives of wheat. And so we'll look at some of those related species and see if there's reduced reactivity in some of those kind of related to grains that are related to wheat. And once you kind of understand this large picture, then you can start a plan towards lowering the reactivity in the commercial wheat. Today, the only proven medical advice for celiac disease is avoidance. And in some people, it's a strict avoidance of wheat flour. So each person reacts a little bit differently to the wheat. And so with the most severe cases of celiac disease, really even avoiding flour dust in the air would be necessary. So, but for most people, just watching food labels and keeping an eye on what you eat would be the common practice. So there's no known medical treatment right now that people are using. I know that there are some groups working on a dietary supplement that might allow people to eat wheat and have less of the effects from the gluten proteins.
I think wheat has gotten a bad rap. There's a lot of books out there, gluten-free diets, encouraging people, and it is self-diagnosed, but frankly we ask a lot of people what gluten is and they're not entirely sure what it is. So we just urge people to be cautious, do your research, understand that gluten is not bad for most people. You want to consume healthy wheat food products. Whole wheat food products are a very important part of your diet to help with the digestive system, and so don't self-diagnose. Make sure you go to your doctor and see what the problem might be.
Wheat is good for you. There's so many benefits. If you look at whole grains and you look at a balanced diet, whole wheat flour is a great part of a nutritious diet. So all whole grains and grain-based foods are not bad for you, and so I think the trends in food and dieting always are kind of fluctuating, and so the people, I think in general, are chasing new trends. But I guess what I would say is a balanced diet that includes whole grains and grain-based foods, along with other protein sources, would be the best way to go, I think.
You can see why the Kansas farmer helps feed the world. That wraps up this episode of Real Ag. If you want to see other programs in the series, visit SmokyHillsTV.org. On behalf of the Real Ag crew, I'm Kyle Bauer.
Production of Real Ag is made possible by
the Kansas Soybean Commission, the Soybean Checkoff, progress powered by farmers.